Chad Ford, ESPN, covers the draft. Very talented draft. We'll see how deep it is. The Sixers have the number 1 pick. They made the trade with Boston. How is that going to shape up? We bring Chad Ford into the conversation now. As Chad, we welcome you back to the show. And, Colangelo pulls this deal off. Did you like the deal for Philadelphia? They were at 3. They gave up a pick next year, obviously, or the year after, but they get the number 1 pick. Was the juice worth the squeeze?
I think it was. I really feel like Philadelphia knew that there was a particular type of player that they needed to really have their big 3. They had their center. They had their playmaking forward. They really needed a dynamic guard that could play on and off the ball, that could shoot, could stretch the floor, that could guard multiple positions in the backcourt, that could be a good secondary ball handler most of the time, but then when he needed to be a primary ball handler, he could handle that. And there was really only one player in this draft that ticked all those boxes and had star potential, and that was Markelle Fultz. And so sitting there at 3, Josh Jackson didn't do that for you. Jason Tatum didn't do that for you. De'Aaron Fox didn't do that for you. Jonathan Isaac didn't do that for you. So you do what you have to do. That's why you collect assets, so that you can go get the player that you really want. And to me, Markelle Fultz was a perfect fit in the puzzle for the 76ers. And I think he's the best player in this draft. But even more importantly, I think he's the best player for the Sixers. And so I think it was a home run for them.
If you had him, Ben Simmons, if they were in the draft, like, where would you have ranked him next to Simmons or in last year's draft class, which was not very good?
I think I still would have had Ben Simmons number 1, but he would have been number 2. And then I actually think that number 2 through number 8 or 9 would be out of this draft. That's how deep this draft is. Before we got to a player like Brandon Ingram, I think there would be 8 to 9 players off the board from this next draft.
Does the fact that's been brought up a lot that Fultz's team only won 9 games, does that bother you at all?
Not at all. All I ask people is if Fultz had played on Kentucky like most top prospects do, or he had played for Duke like most top prospects do, or Kansas or North Carolina, do you think he would have won 8 games? And the answer is no. He would have won 30 games, and he would have been going deep into the tournament. He didn't have another NBA prospect on his roster. He did not have another McDonald's American on his roster. I don't think he had a D-League player on his roster. I don't think he had a future pro out of Europe on his roster. And he was playing in a very competitive Pac-12 conference. I'm not sure what else you'd ask him to do when you have opposing teams that can game plan just for one guy every night. I think it's actually remarkable how well he played, considering that that's the goal of every defense every night is to stop one guy. You don't have that luxury when you play a Kentucky or a Kansas or a North Carolina or a Duke or a UCLA. You just don't. There's too many other good players on the court. Markelle Fultz was alone. He was a lone man in the wilderness in Washington last year.
Chad Ford, ESPN's with us. Chad, how does he fit in with Ben Simmons? And we haven't seen Ben, but what is your view of him as a pro and how these two guys will fit together? Because it sounds like the Sixers are going to play them in some sort of backcourt role together.
Yeah, again, so many teams in the league are moving to positionless basketball, and the traditional two-guard, point guard, small forward roles don't really make sense to them anymore. And Brett Brown is one of those guys. And I think you have to look at it as primary and secondary ball handlers. And I think he sees Ben Simmons as a primary ball handler. Whether you want to call that a point guard or not, because he's too big to guard the point guard position. He is going to be the guy who's going to initiate the offense. He has that sort of court vision and skill. Very Lonzo Ball-esque, except that he's 6'10", 240. And that makes a big difference and is very intriguing. I think if you watch the way Giannis Antetokounmpo played for the Bucks this year, that's what the Sixers envisioned for him. And so then you have Markelle Fultz, who's an excellent shooter, is an excellent penetrator, can play point guard and has great court vision. And they see him being a secondary ball handler to Ben Simmons. The Blazers do that with Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum. They have 2 ball handlers that are on the court together. The Rockets do that with James Harden and Patrick Beverley. The Warriors do that. They have multiple ball handlers who can handle the ball and pass the ball on the Warriors team. And I think that that's the direction that the Sixers want to go. The other thing that they love about Fultz is they need a floor spacer for Joel Embiid. And I thought Fultz is one of the 3 or 4 best shooters in this draft on top of everything else that he provides.
Right now, if there's a weakness in his game, what is it? What if he ended up just being a bust? Why was it? What happened?
I think he's the safest player in the draft because I can tell you every year I've covered the draft, with every prospect, I could give you at least one significant weakness that could potentially cause them problems in the NBA. I could even have told you with LeBron James when he came into the league that he wasn't a very good shooter and that was potentially going to be a problem for him. It wasn't, but it was a potential problem for him coming in. If you ask me what Markelle Fultz's weakness is right now as a basketball player, I don't have a good answer for you. I could say he could have played harder on defense. I could have said that his body language could have been a little bit better at Washington, that maybe he could have been a little bit more aggressive looking for his shot. But if you're asking me from a skill standpoint or from a physical standpoint where his weakness is, I don't think he has one, and I think that's why he's such an attractive first-round pick or number 1 pick in the draft, because I don't see much bustability in Markelle Fultz. I do with Lonzo Ball. I don't know that he's going to be able to defend anybody in the NBA, and that shot's funky. I do with Josh Jackson. He's a poor shooter and a terrible free throw shooter. I do a little bit with Jason Tatum because I haven't really seen him play defense, rebound, or pass the ball. All I know is he really knows how to score. I see it with De'Aaron Fox because he might be the most abysmal shooter in the draft, and that could be a problem. But Markelle Fultz, man, I don't see it.
If theoretically, hypothetically, the Knicks said, we'll give you Porzingis for that number 1 pick and whatever else, are you listening if you're Brian Colangelo?
For sure. I think Porzingis would go number 1 in this draft. I think it would be a consensus number 1. And not only that, that's just from a scouting standpoint. And I loved Porzingis when he came out. He was number 2 for me personally. I think he was number 3 or 4 on our big board from NBA scouts. But when I did my own grade A mock draft, I had him going number 2 to the Lakers. I just thought he had elite potential. But it's also about what we know now, right? Now we know 2 years into his career that he's the real deal, right? And I think there's such an attractiveness with the draft because these guys are blank slates to a certain extent. It's all about potential. It's what Markelle Fultz could be or what Lonzo Ball might be someday. And you hope that someday he's going to be an all-star. You hope someday he's going to be a top 15 pick. I already know at this point that barring injuries, Kristaps Porzingis is going to be an all-star someday. It's clear. We've seen how he's adjusted to the league. We've seen his trajectory. It's all a major question mark. And, I've covered the draft for a long time, and I like to feel like I'm good at what I do, but I make mistakes all the time. There's guys that I think are going to be really good that aren't, and guys that I don't think are going to be very good that are. And so much of that is not because you're getting the scouting wrong, it's that you're getting the human being wrong. That you don't understand what's going on between the ears, you don't understand the decisions they're going to make, to the pros, how they're going to react to the speed of the NBA, the fame, all of that stuff. We don't have the answers to those questions. And so it's a tricky business projecting the NBA draft. And Malcolm Gladwell said he just thinks that people get lucky sometimes, and maybe there's some truth to that. But once you've seen them play in the league a couple of years, I think you have a lot more intel to make a confident prediction of what kind of player they're going to be. And for all those reasons, the Knicks are absolutely bananas if they think that they can trade Kristaps Porzingis for a draft pick or even multiple draft picks, and that they're getting a better deal than just keeping the player.
Chad Ford's with us. Who is your bust in this draft?
Yeah, that's tough. Bust is such a, bust to me is a player that goes high that then in turn disappoints. And I'm not sure that there's a player in this draft that I see right now that we're ranking high that will disappoint. I mean, that's always the problem, right? If we're ranking them high, we don't think they're going to be a bust. If we did think they were a bust, they were going to be a bust, we would rank them lower.
Right.
But maybe the guy that I would say I think people have to be careful on is Lauri Markkanen out of Arizona. He's a very good shooter, and I've had some NBA teams tell me they think he's the best shooter in this draft. But the Dirk Nowitzki comparisons scare me, and the Porzingis comparisons scare me. He's not the athlete that either of those guys are. He's certainly not the defender that Porzingis is as a rim protector, as a rebounder. I don't think he plays with the aggression that a Dirk Nowitzki plays with. I don't think he has the same sort of mental makeup of either of those guys. And just because he's a tall European 7-footer who can shoot the basketball, I think the expectations get out of control sometimes, and people say, oh, he's the next Dirk. And if you think that you're drafting the next Dirk, I think you're going to be really disappointed in him. If you think you're drafting the next Ryan Anderson or Channing Frye, then I think that he'll be good and he'll be fine. And those guys aren't busts. Those guys are important players in the league. It's just all about expectation.
Yeah. From your perspective, is there a guy you think that's going to go too high?
It could be him. If he goes 7 to the Timberwolves, I think that's probably a little high for Markkanen. That confuses me a little bit. And then I'd say the other guy that I worry about is Justin Jackson out of North Carolina. He's a non-athlete. He shot the ball very well in the first half of the season, but his freshman and sophomore years, he struggled as a three-point shooter. And the end of his junior year, he also struggled and sort of reverted back to the mean a bit as a player. If Justin Jackson isn't shooting 40+% from three in the NBA, there's nothing else that he really adds of value to me as an NBA player. And I think it's a legitimate question to question whether he's actually going to be able to shoot that. Actually, if you look at the history of shooters, your freshman and sophomore years are much more predictive of what kind of shooter you're going to be in the NBA than your junior year is.
All right, last one here for Chad Ford. So many rumors over the last 48 hours. I mean, the last 2 days have been more exciting than the whole NBA playoffs. But do you expect tomorrow to bring big-time fireworks, or do you think the boat has been rocked enough and that it will be pretty steady tomorrow night?
I think we're going to see some trades. We always do. Danny Ainge is out there working the phones. The Lakers are still trying to figure out how to get Paul George. The Knicks, I think, have been very restless and out working the phones trying to figure out something that turns this ship around for New York. I really think that we're going to leave 2 or 3 more big trades in the next 48 hours.
Okay, Chad Ford at ESPN. I know you're busy. I appreciate giving us some time.
All right, take care, guys.